There's Behrouz. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Arnold Zable, and welcome to the 2020 Bono Wiener Memorial Lecture. And I welcome you on behalf of the Jewish Labour Bund, an organisation I grew up in, a great mass movement for Jewish workers, trade union movement, a movement that believed in language as the heart and soul of a people, and an organisation which to this day is concerned with human rights, minority rights, with language, and with many progressive ideals. And a special welcome also to any Indigenous people who may be present. I'd like to acknowledge the elders, past, present, and emerging. My whole vision of Melbourne was transformed by extraordinary journeys I did in the 30 years ago now with Auntie Joy Murphy of the Wurundjeri people and Caroline Briggs of the Bunurong people. And this is where we are now, many of us who are watching, and where I am. I'm on the Wurundjeri land. And I know this is something that is close to Behrouz's heart as well. And we may touch on the issues of indigeneity later on in our chat. Behrouz, just a few words about Bono Wiener, after whom this lecture is named. He was born in 1920 in Lodz in Poland, and he grew up in a house of books, a house of culture, a house of progressive ideas. And he was also at a very young age, he became a leader of the resistance in the Lodz ghetto at the age of 21. He was famous, for example, and this is an interesting connection with you, Behrouz, he was famous for being in charge of the secret radio. If they caught him, he and another person who's still alive in Melbourne, Ron Goldberg, they had a secret radio, and if they were caught, they would be executed. And through this secret radio, he was communicating with the underground outside the ghetto. And through this communication, he was lifting the spirits of the people in a very, very dark time. And so there's a lot of parallels here. Another parallel I find, Behrouz, is that eventually he was sent to Auschwitz, and he even became a resistance leader in Auschwitz. And he once told me that the most important thing for survival, and we'll talk about this later too, is dignity, having your dignity, even in the darkest place. So for him, he said that he would give away food for a bar of soap so he could wash himself every night. That was more important for him, was to be able to be clean and feel human. In 1948, he escaped Poland and he sought refuge. He eventually came to Melbourne in 1951. I knew him since I was very little. I loved him. He does remind me of your Uncle Ali, the stories you've told me about Uncle Ali, who was a breaker of conventions, a larger-than-life character. He loved life. He said, I'm not a victim. I just love life. He was a great traveller. He even set up a travel company so he could travel everywhere and see his friends, because his friends were all over the world. They had spread to many countries where they found refuge after the war. So it's amazing to have known him. He was a mentor. He taught me so many things. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm here now talking to you. And finally, before I introduce you, I just wanted to say to everyone that we also want to mention 4 people who have passed away recently, who are very close to us. One was Moshe Eisenbut, a Yiddish novelist and a community activist who was a lifelong Bundist, lived to his mid-90s. Moshe Goldberg, who died recently, he was a beautiful, a mensch, we say in the Yiddish language, a special human being and a friend to many of us. Floris Kalman, who was a really, I'd say, a gentle soul who loved the Yiddish language, and Leon Goldman, who, when I was young, was a youth leader. He was very, very skillful at communicating with young people, and later on he became a donor and a supporter in other ways. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce you, Behrouz. I mean, what can I say? You're a man of many guises, a man of many accomplishments, a writer, a poet, filmmaker, cultural advocate, founder of cultural magazine Weria. You've got a master's degree in geopolitics and political science. But I guess what brought us together was the fact that you decided to seek freedom. And we'll discuss in a moment why you decided to seek freedom. And of course, that this is in a way where your new life began. And we'll explore that. I think it's important to mention that you've made, co-directed an extraordinary film, which you filmed on your iPhone, Chalka, Please Tell Us the Time, a full-length documentary which was feted at film festivals. And also, of course, No Friend But the Mountains, this extraordinary book. I remember when I first read the first chapters back in 2015, I thought, one day, and it's won many prizes. It won the Victoria Prize, the richest prize in Australian literature, but it's much more than that. And we're going to discuss that as well, what this book means when we talk about resistance. And finally, I'd just like to say that we were introduced, you and I, by the wonderful Janet Galbraith, person that we both love, who founded Writers Through Fences. I don't know anyone who has felt the pain of refugees for so long the way Janet has. And it was Janet that contacted me and introduced me to you in 2014. And it's a friendship which has enriched my life. So welcome, Behrouz. And I wanted to begin with this, right? The topic is freedom and resistance. And I wanted to begin with this extraordinary quote. We discussed it again in Christchurch, but it came in a dialogue between us in 2017. So we're going back to a dark time. And I asked you a question in this dialogue. Behrouz, you say that 4 years after leaving Iran, you feel yourself to be a stateless person and you belong to no country. Where do you belong now? How do you sense the world around you? And you said, and I want everyone to see it, you know, the beauty of this as well as the depth. I always imagine the world map. I always imagine a tiny island and a prison in the tiny island. It's where I am at this moment. 3 years ago, when the local people attacked our prison and killed a person and injured 100 people, the guards took us to a soccer ground outside the prison. That was the first time we had been out. They gathered 900 men on the soccer ground for a night. On that dark night, I was looking at the sky and I felt that there was no place in the world for me. They even took away my prison. I felt that I don't even belong to the earth, and I was looking at the sky and imagining another planet. 3 years since that night, I'm still imagining the world map. I'm still imagining a tiny island and a prison in that tiny island. But I'm still alive, and I have changed my mind, and I feel deeply that I belong to the earth. I belong to nature, and I believe in solid ground. I think we are human and don't have any shelter but humanity. We have to trust in humanity and love humanity. I have had people from around the world and Australia sending messages to me, sharing their kindness with me, and I think that I belong to this world and I belong to the humans beyond the political borders. I am a free man. That's an extraordinary statement. Can you comment on that and how it feels to you now, going back to those times.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would like to say hello to everyone. I think it is great. We had the journey, Arnold. We have been together for many years. But for the audience, I should say that I and Arnold, we met each other in Christchurch, New Zealand, when I arrived. I think it was after a week that I went to the airport, I and Janet, and we saw that Arnold. Yeah, for the first time I saw Arnold, and yeah, that was really incredible. So we had we spent short time together, but we had a really wonderful journey. So Arnold have been with me for many years, and when I was in Manus Island, we started dialogue, and I think it is about 10,000 words. You told me.
Yeah, I think it's at least. Yep,
Yeah, at least 10,000 words. So we published some works together in the age, some part of this dialogue that we had, and but still we have 10,000 words, and hopefully one day we make it as a book on future. So this part that Arnold read was a part of that dialogue that we had on that time. And I think, of course, I think understanding of freedom and feeling freedom depends to your situation, it depends to the situation you are. And for me, it's very interesting that when I got freedom, still I had to struggle, and still I'm struggling to understand freedom, because when you are in a prison, one of the mechanisms that naturally you use to survive is just imagine future and imagine the day that you are free, imagine freedom. And I think that that is a mechanism that helps any detainee or prisoners to survive. And when you get freedom, it's really difficult to change that mechanism and have a natural life. So when you are free, still you imagine future, and you feel that you are in future, you feel you are in the future. Recently, I had a conversation with Tara June Winch, the Australian Indigenous writer. And so this conversation is going to publish in Mianjin magazine in Australia, I think on December. So our dialogue, our conversation was about future and time. And I think it's very interesting. I said in that conversation that I feel that still now I am in future. Still, I feel that I'm in future. And I think that is very difficult. That is very difficult and take time that you really understand freedom. So my understanding of freedom is changed, I mean, feeling freedom right now. So it's really different with that time that I was in Manus Island. In Manus Island, I had to imagine future. I had to imagine freedom. But now that I am free, I'm just struggling to stop the time, and live in present. And but I think it takes time that I change this mechanism.
It's interesting, Behrouz, that over the many years being involved with my own family's experience of being immigrants, but having a very, very challenging past, and with many, many people from so many different backgrounds who have been on a journey similar to yours in all kinds of different ways. And I've noticed that in a way there are three acts in this life, right? Act one is the time before. Once upon a time I had a home. I lived in Ilam, or I lived in my parents in Białystok, right? In Poland, or I lived in Sicily, or my wife's family, you know, they were living in the beautiful island of Ithaca, you know, and that was my homeland. I had my language, I had my people, I had my village and my town and my city. Then something happened. Act two, something happened. With my parents, it was a tragedy. I mean, some of the people watching now, quite a few, they come from that background where something extraordinarily tragic happened and people began to run and many lost their lives. But people, this can take many forms too. You know, I think part of Act two is spending years in a refugee camp. Part of Act two is taking a boat journey. Part of Act two, there are people here still, your friends, Moz and Fahad and the men at the Mantra Hotel, who are still in Act two. It can be years and years. Finally, there's Act three, which is the rest of your life. This is, in a way, you've entered Act three, it seems to me. You know, and it's and Act one and two are a part of it.
Yeah, I think our understanding is deep of freedom is depends to place too, and sometimes I feel that when you move from a place to another place, you understand freedom in a different way, and so that is just my experience, you know. But in other side, when you think about the place that you left behind, you feel that you left something, you left a part of you there, you know. And for me, so when I left Ilam as my place, the place that I was born, and I went to Tehran, the capital city, yeah, I left a big part of myself in Ilam. And then when I left Iran, I went to, so I ended up in Manus Island. I felt that I left, you know, a huge part of myself. And when I was in Manus Island and I left there, still I feel that I left a part of myself there, because we belong to place. And now that I'm in New Zealand, yeah, definitely the people that I used to be with them, you know, the refugees, the detainees, and some of them are in detention now, as you mentioned, Farhad, Moz, and others. It's really difficult, and sometimes I find it very difficult to, that's why I'm not really active on social media right now, because I feel I don't know what should I say, you know. I find it difficult to do my activity online on social media. And for example, last week I had a meeting with one of the labor members in the New Zealand Parliament, and we were talking. We had the conversation about the refugees in detention in Australia and Port Moresby and Nauru. But you know, I do activity, but it's really difficult. It's really difficult because I feel, really, to be honest, I feel that still I'm not free in some ways, because sometimes when I talk with them on the phone in the detention, it's really difficult to see them. And now I understand that how it was difficult for you, Janet, Omid, Manus, and others who we used to work together. How was difficult for you that I was in that detention. And in some ways, freedom is scary. If you remember that poem that I wrote, I am scared of freedom. You know, I say I enjoy freedom, but I scared of freedom. And that poem written to that time that we became free in the island in some ways, you know, for the first time after 3 years. It was so difficult when you, and you know, my, so let's talk about something else. I wanted to talk about my beard. Yeah. Part of it.
But look, you've touched on something very important, and it's awful, Behrouz. You feel so powerless sometimes. Look at these guys, you know, Fahad, Moz, people that I've come to know now. You know, what can you say? I know Fahad is actually watching, and when I ring you, Fahad, you know, we try everything, but still this brutal government keeps these guys in prison. They are imprisoned, and their world is what they see through the window or a prison yard now for Fahad. And there comes a point where, you know, we tried everything, and we're still trying. We're not going to give up. But when you have a conversation, you feel, oh, you know, what can I say? And actually, Fahad says to me, don't worry, I can handle it. I'm strong, I'm a lion. So, but you're right. And in a way, you can't be fully free until everyone else is free. And it goes back to that moment, you know, you coming to New Zealand, and that whole plan came out of that despair. We can go back to that because it came out of the night of the elections in May 2019, when if Labor would have won those elections, they would have introduced the New Zealand solution. It was a promise, it was going to happen. But then it didn't happen. And you started immediately send the text that the people on Manus were starting to self-harm. They were in utter despair. And out of that came an idea about New Zealand. But I want to move back now, right? Because I want to explore the different forms of freedom and resistance in your life. And so let's go back to Ilam. Let's go back to Kurdistan. Sometimes in our dialogue, we touched on the issue of language, especially languages like the Kurdish, and I know there are various dialects of the Kurdish language, and the languages of minority people and indigenous people, and languages which are under threat. To some extent, Yiddish is in that category. So let's go back there. What was it like growing up in Kurdistan, in Western Iran, as a member of the Kurdish community?
Yeah, I think first I should mention that sometimes people say that, oh, Behrouz, you did this works in Manus Island, and you know, I said I did nothing. Just I borrowed the resistance culture in Kurdistan and reproduce it in Manus Island, because they colonized Kurdistan for more than 100 years in the modern period. And so, of course, we have been, I mean, the Kurdish people have been fighting and struggling to survive, to keep the culture alive. And the central governments, 4 central governments surrounded Kurdistan, and they have still have different projects to take our identity. So when that happened, so that created the resistant knowledge, you know. And when I was in Manus Island, I found another colony, because I believe that this policy is established on colonialist mentality and thinking. And that's why it was easy for me at the first stage to understand this. And then I reproduced that culture, that resistance culture in Manus Island to challenge the system. So, but in terms of Kurdistan, if I talk about Kurdistan, so in Kurdistan, I mean that part in west of Iran, I'm talking about that Kurdistan. So we have 4 provinces, and I was born in Ilam. And unfortunately, so the Kurdish language has at least 4 dialects, and these dialects had this opportunity, especially in Iraq, you know, even during the Saddam Hussein time. On that time, there was this opportunity that really they put it in an education system. So that dialogue and other dialogues survived. But unfortunately, the dialogue that my people speak is disappearing, unfortunately, in Ilam, and in Kermanshah. So these 2 provinces there. And how that happened? Because they don't recognize Kurdish language as a formal language. So when I went to school, when I was 7 years old, I had to learn Farsi. So our people never had this opportunity to learn Kurdish language. They don't have this opportunity to write. They don't have this opportunity to have media. And so education system is in Farsi. And I think that is very, you know, because I believe that when they take your language, it means that they take your values, they take your perspective, they take your understanding of the world, you know, and they take your identity. So that's why now, unfortunately, we have a huge problem there now, and they have been assimilating our people in Farsi culture. And that's why our people, a part of the society, I mean, the artists, writers, musicians, have started a cultural movement there to actually resist in front of this. But unfortunately, most of people now speak with their children in Farsi, and it's really a big problem. And sometimes I say, people say, why did you leave your country? I say, because of language. Because my activity in Ilam was just to save the language. And I'm only one person. There are many people who are really doing great jobs. And but I have been a part of this cultural movement just to keep the culture alive. And now we can talk about this. You know that now I'm working on some projects, yeah, in this language. And so we can talk about that. But I think it's very similar to what's happened in New Zealand with Maori people. But in New Zealand now they are in, so Maori language is a formal language, official language. And now they are trying to teach the young generation, the kids. And I think New Zealand is in the right track. But Australia, you know that many indigenous languages disappear. And so I was talking about Tara June Winch, you know, yeah. So she, I think she inspired me and many people that how we work to bring this culture back, this language back, the languages, the words that, and it is a tragedy it is a tragedy that for me, you know, I'm not, as a young man, you know, it's a tragedy that I witness how a language has disappeared. I witnessed that. It is a tragedy. It is a tragedy because people imagine that a language disappear in 100 years, 200 years, in 1,000 years. But in my age, I witnessed that how a language became. But now we have a resistance there. Of course, still we now have media, but we are using social media. We now have education system, completely still is Farsi, but we are struggling. And I think that is very similar to history of your people too.
Yeah.
That, yeah, that how.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah,
You know, when I speak Yiddish, and a lot of people listening will have the same feeling. I feel like a different person. I am a different person, and it's very hard to describe. But I like the person I am in that language, and I like the perspective on the world that I have from that language. There's a warmth. There is an immediate feeling of brotherhood and sisterhood. And of course, it's a language where we have our great writers, and you have your poets and your writers as well. And you're absolutely right. The issue of Indigenous languages here is huge. There were over 250 Indigenous languages. I think there are 60 that are to varying degrees still around. But you know, the rest, the Wurundjeri people here in Melbourne, they got the language back by the women, kept the memory of it. Mainly the women, came down through the women, from the mother to the daughter to the daughter. Auntie Joy Murphy told me this. But also, you know, they're finding words from dictionaries that missionaries made of their language. And there are projects of language retrieval. But of course, part of the tragedy was that part of the tragedy of colonialism is the suppression of language. And this leads to a very interesting thing about Manus Island. I think one of the very interesting things that happened to you on Manus Island is that you began to explore Manutian culture and the beauty of that culture. You know, and you easily related to that, right? Even though some of the Manutians were your guards, but you cut through and you developed a close friendship and discovered a lot of beauty in that culture as well, and then began to, I guess, I'll ask you now to reflect on that and reflect on the paradox of Manus Island being the place of your imprisonment.
Yeah, I think, you know, in Manus Island, actually, I didn't try to be a voice of those people. I didn't want to speak on behalf of Manusian people because, you know, of course, they were a part of this story, and they became victim under this policy. But everyone just talk about the refugees, but actually now I'm sure if we study this in Manus Island and we go and look at the society, there is a huge problem there, social, cultural problem there, because the balance of the community just, you know, they become imbalanced, you know. A huge change happened in their community, their small community. And also this policy damaged the environment. And at least 40 children remain from the refugees. And the refugees wanted to take them to America, but they didn't let them to do that. I mean, now there is a huge problem in Manus Island. on that time, I did some article about them, but just my perspective was not really a cultural perspective. My perspective was because I think I was not in a position to speak about their culture. So what I did in some articles, I wrote about how this policy damaged their society, their community. For example, an article that I wrote about the hospital and how people in Manus Island died very easily. And alongside the hospital, the local hospital there, that was not a real hospital. The security companies made a huge money, and people died very easily.
Yeah.
And also some articles about the how this policy damaged the environment and how but definitely they are a part of this story that unfortunately the humanitarian organizations and the media always forget about them. They just talk about the refugees, but of course they were a part of this story.
Yeah, look, the most beautiful, you've written so many stories, and for me, one of the most beautiful stories, and in a way important stories, was a story you told about the guy who lives on that little island, where you go, and a Manusian guy who I think he lost, was it an arm during the fight with the Japanese? That guy who provided shelter. Yeah, that story about the guy who provided shelter for refugees. You want to rest, you want a beautiful place to come over to my island. That was a great story. And they had a book too of welcome and stories. Can you touch on that just for a moment?
So that story that you are mentioning is a story of a man, a local man, that he lived in a very small island, as much as like a soccer ground, very small island, close to Manus Island, like half an hour by boat. And in that island, a very small island, tiny island, like 3-4 families live there. And the guy who was like a elder there, he was with a disability, so he lost his hand, his arm actually, because of I think it was because of explosion mine that was remained from Second World War. And so this story is about that man that was published in the Saturday paper. And I think that is very interesting because in that article, I try to tell something about the history of Manus Island and how the superpower create a big war. And those people, even they didn't know what is going on, what is happening, why these people are, this plane are here, this ship are here, and why they are fighting. And so many broken ships remain from the Second World War. And also, and still, after 70 years, still sometimes some people, some fishermen, like that local man, are facing this problem, explosion. Sometimes and I think, and also the beautiful part of this story is that he created a shelter. And he asked the refugees just to if they want to have a rest, just go to that island and spend some time with him and his family. And I think that is very beautiful when you look at the again, when you imagine the map of the world, you know, that a huge island like Australia with only 25 million population, banish the refugees, innocent people, still keep people in detention for 7 years. And that the man with disability, he created a shelter for the refugees just to come here and have rest. And I think, I don't know what should I say, you know, when I talk about this story.
Look, it's I think you've said it. It's a paradox. A man who's lost an arm, who's living a simple life on this little island, showed more kindness than our government.
Yeah.
And I want to go back to that. And I want to explore the issue of resistance. We're talking about freedom and resistance. So when there's a moment for me, the most devastating moment in a way, and there are many, many, many devastating moments in No Friend But the Mountain. But in a way, the most devastating moment is on Christmas Island. You arrived at the wrong place at the wrong time in July 2013, and then in August, you're being taken to the plane, and you are not Behrouz Boochani, you are MEG 45. You're a number.
You remember my number very well.
Yeah, maybe I'll tattoo it one day.
I want to forget about it.
I'm sorry I brought it up. But anyway, so you're being taken over the tarmac, right? And this is the moment. This is the moment when the real horror begins, right? And I don't want to go too much back into that. I want people to see this awful moment, you know, and you describe it so powerfully in the book, this sense that you're in a zoo, you are being watched by the reporters and the photographers, and you are disempowered. It's being taken away from you, you know.
Yeah.
So then you arrive on Manus Island and you have to begin to resist. And so can you just reflect on this moment, and then this arrival, and how long it just took you to change that frame of mind and move from being that disempowered person, that number, to beginning to resist and regaining your humanity?
Yeah, you know, so you are talking about that particular time that we just arrived from the ocean, just we arrived, and so they put us in a situation just to humiliate us. And I think so by our clothes, the clothes that they gave us, and also the way they just took us and forced us and banished us to Manus Island. It was very difficult time, really. And when you are in that situation, you just to resist, and just in that particular moment, just to feel your dignity, just to feel that you are a human, to resist in front of this huge humiliation. I think you just think about something inside yourself, to find some, to touch some part of your soul, and to create some dignity. You know, you are exploring that dignity. And for me, actually, the thing that helped me on that particular time, because we were completely powerless and we didn't have time to really resist. Just we had to find something in our personality, you know. And for me, just thinking about this, that I'm a writer, really, that I'm a writer, and that gave me power, you know, make me feel, yeah, that remind me of who I am, you know, as a person. And in that particular time was like that. But when they sent us to, when we arrived in Manus Island, so yeah, I had this opportunity to do something. And when you do something against this system, you feel power. You have something. You get your identity back, your dignity back. And that's why I think not only me, you know, all of the people, any person in that situation always try to do something. And I think if you remember just that story that I wrote about Farhad, Moz, and Kazem, the three Kurdish musicians in the camp. And I think that's why when you talk with Farhad, he said that instead that you tell him, he said that, oh, don't be worried, you know, because he tries to, you know, he's creative. He creates something, you know, he create music. And music in this situation, in these circumstances, is a tool to challenge the system. And when you challenge the system, doesn't matter in which way, you know, when you challenge this system, you feel power, you feel that you have dignity, you touch it. And I think that is very important. And that's why I say that what Janet Galbraith has done is very important, because Janet create this space, this opportunity to the detainees to write, to create, to make art. And I think that is very important. And in a big level, if we talk about Kurdistan or history of your people, you see that who saved your people, you know, who saved that? You know, you have great writers, artists, musicians, and the people who bring your language back, you know, the cultural elements back, you know,
Absolutely,
that is resistance.
Absolutely. You know, we grew up with the songs and the poems, and the extraordinary stories of theaters that were set up in hell, right? And I remember the story of Mehdi Savari, who set up a theater, who performed theater in Manus Island. People don't really know what happened. The amazing things that happened on Manus Island, cultural resistance. And we've got to see the picture, right? The picture that comes through so clearly in No Friend But the Mountain, in the novel, and the picture of there's no privacy. You're living in this crazy place. You said you once described it like bees. We're like bees in a hive, and there's nowhere to go. But then, for me, the other image is you sitting on the white plastic chair, you know, at the fence. So, in a way, you're able. How can you find a place in this insanity where there's no privacy, where you have to queue even to go to the toilet, and it seems to me that this is what one of the things that art does. You become a witness. You can be detached. you can become, you were called the reporter too. You know, you were working 18 hours a day, reporting, sending out many, many messages in many forms. So is that how it was, that you were able to get that sort of distance and find yourself, your own humanity and identity in that witness space?
Yeah, definitely. And you know, that's why in that dialogue that you read at the beginning of this event, you know, the last sentence was that I am a free man, you know. And I think that is, of course, I was in prison. Of course, it was difficult. But what's happened that a detainee, a prisoner, while still is in prison, claim this. It is a big claim that you are in prison, you say, I am a free man. You know, and I think that freedom, of course, that came through, you know, writing. And, you know, creation doesn't mean that you write, you make music, and even doesn't matter that you create art or not. You know, even a detainee, when is making fun, making satire, you know. And I think the role of those people, the funny people in that place, that circumstances, was very vital, was important, you know, because they created life, a moment that people feel free a little, you know. And I think that is important, those people. And I don't know what is the English word for that. Humor, you say that?
Yeah, humor.
Humor. Yeah, that is very important. And I think in the book, Mason the Whore.
That's the one. That's the character, isn't it?
Because he plays with the system.
Yeah, yeah.
He plays with the system. He is not passive in front of the system. He has performance.
Yeah.
He sing. He dance.
Yeah.
And I mean, that is resistance. And you know, if we talk about Kurdistan, actually one of the very impressive pictures that I have about Kurdistan is that when the in Syria, in Rojava, when the courts, especially women, were fighting against ISIS, and still in other part of Kurdistan, they dance, you know, dancing and singing and music is a part of the resistance.
Mm-hmm.
You know, now if people just Google it and you see that, oh, these people, and but it's different. It is in some people, some communities, some cultural elements is more important. Like in some culture, in your culture, I imagine, and I have just general knowledge. In your people, you know, the role of literature, I think, is very important. You know, and you mentioned theater. You know, in Kurdish culture, I think music is very important. You know, music, poetry.
Yeah, and it's the same. It's interesting how in oppressed cultures, poetry, music, performance, they seem to be the main forms. Look, time is moving so fast, but I think one moment we have to share, that extraordinary moment when you went up in the tree. I mean, we talk about protest and resistance, right? And many forms of resistance, of kind of subtle, non-violent resistance.
Yeah.
But to me, that moment when you climbed up in the tree and made the protest. And, you know, can you just quickly tell that story of the day you discovered you are a poet?
Yeah, actually, now in social media, some of the people who actually are not, I mean, in Iran, are not happy with my political ideas. They did research and they found that story in Guardian about that day I climbed a tree in inside the prison in Manus Island, and I did a protest. And they found that, and when I do some tweet, they just put it there, and they said, "Oh, you know, you climb a tree," and you know, they find it in a superficial way. But for me, of course, you know, that is just a joke. But it was a huge, I think, protest in different layers. If you look at it, it was very interesting, that protest that I did inside the prison camp. I climbed a tree, the biggest tree there, and I went on top of the tree. I was half naked, and I did that protest. I was there for 10 hours, you know, for 10 hours, and it was so, you know, for me on that day, that particular day, I just wanted to play with the system, you know, and for me it was like a performance. I was performing when the guards, police, everyone were gathering around the tree, and they asked me come down, and I was in top of the tree. And then I asked for music. You know, I say, if you don't give my music, I kill myself. And they, yeah, they send my music, just an MP3 player. And I was listening to music. I was half naked on top of the tree. And I made the poem that now I am free. I'm free of the prison, because this tree is taller than the fences. And now I am able to see the ocean, the jungle, and I am able to see some places that you cannot see now. So I am out of the system. And that was very interesting. In end of the day, I was there for 10 hours. In end of the day, the psychologist came there, and he said that you should come down, that we talk, we have negotiation. And I said, oh, you are a stupid man. You know, if I come down, I lose my power. You know, while I am on top of this tree, you follow my orders, you bring me music, you know, and the reason that now you are there, because I'm in top of this tree. So if I come down, I lose my power completely. I lose my power. So that was a very incredible day, but for me it was like a performance. But people who were following me, this protest, they really, they didn't know that I'm enjoying. Actually, I was enjoying, and it was one of the, yeah, it's huge. You remind me of that. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm very glad I did that.
Yeah, and we I remember that we were following it. Janet and I were following it here in Melbourne when you did it, and we of course were worried. We were thinking, what's going on? And we were worried for your safety. But then later we realized the beauty of that form of protest. Time is moving so fast. There were so many other things I wanted to touch on, but before I opened up for a few questions, but there is one thing that's that I think is very important, and that is that extraordinary 3-week protest you did when the centre was going to be closed down, and you created what I would call a republic of the stateless, the Republic of the Stateless. People were making a protest for something, for their humanity. And I remember you said, you wrote a manifesto, which was published in the Saturday paper, and you said, our resistance is the spirit that haunts Australia. That's one of the things you said. And then you also said all the conversations that you were having at that time, this was in 2017, I think, are driven by one thing, and one thing only, and that is freedom. Can you talk a little bit about that extraordinary moment of protest, which reached out to the world? It got to many, many places.
Yeah, I think it was a huge moment, and I think this is, I believe, and I strongly believe that those days, if people of Australia, if really people of Australia, if you know, really, I mean, the researchers, unfortunately, you know, in Australia, really, just they didn't care about those days. Just they care about, oh, these refugees are there and we should help them. I mean, our supporters, I'm talking about our supporters. So, you know, just they talk, they look at it as a story, but not as a, you know, in a historical way. They didn't look at that. But I think that was very important in the history of Australia. Really, I believe in that strongly, because imagine 400 men, you know, 400 men were in a remote prison, in a remote island. They left them and they were resisting without food, water, medication, nothing. And they survived for 23 days, 24 days. And the way they resisted, the way they were democratic, you know, because that community was very democratic. We created a republic, really, for 23, 24 days. The way we shared a little money, food that we had, how we shared that food among the detainees, how we care about the animals, how we had a meeting, public meeting, how we care about the sick people. You know, I'm not going to go to the details, so people can go and do research about it. There are lots of stories about that, those 24 days. But it was very important because had the big lesson to Australia, because we were facing Australia, had the big lesson. And in end, they forced people, they violated, you know, the police guards attacked the detainees. So, I mean, in one side, the detainees were peaceful. In other side, the police and the government was very brutal.
Well, you know, Behrouz, you know, like I said, we just haven't got the time to explore everything. But one thing that comes out of all of this, you know, and the stories you've been telling, and is, and we talked about this when we went. Remember on the Sunday we went for a long walk in Christchurch around the streets. I can still see that. It was a Sunday afternoon, and we were talking about legacy. We were talking about the fact that this time should not be wiped out from memory, that this time has to be documented, and it's the same with everything. We talk about Indigenous people. They wanted to suppress the story, and they suppressed the story. And so we're talking here about that mission, that mission that began from the moment you stepped into Manus Island, and now bringing it to a kind of completion. What do we have here? We have in the form of film, we have in the form of novel, we have in the form of reportage and many stories. And of course, the contributions made by many people that we see on Janet Galbraith's Writing Through Fences project, that we see coming even now from Fahad and from Moz, and the songs that they are writing and the art that they're still trying to create in these terrible circumstances. All of this, I think that this is so important that it's there, that because it's been documented in so many forms, it's there. It is what. So, yeah,
they cannot say we didn't do that.
Yeah.
They cannot say that. No.
Yeah.
And you know, just one thing I should mention, you know, next year I will publish a book, and this book is a collection of my articles, but the best articles, you know, that for example, that article, that a letter from Manus, this one about those 23 days, we have it.
Yeah.
You know, the article about the you know, that man with disability, you know, all of these, like 25 articles, and 6 researchers around the world respond to these articles by writing an article. And next year we publish this, definitely, on yeah, just to have it as a book.
Yeah.
You know, and I think this this system, I say that as the news only. So this system always try to, you know, say that, oh, we didn't do that, you know, and we are resisting. We are resisting by creating a body of word just to say that we exist.
Yes.
And you cannot forget about us. You cannot forget about this part of history. Yeah. So that is the whole picture. So in end, there are lots of words remain.
Yeah.
And
yeah, absolutely. And we've got just, thank you, Behrouz. And we've got about 10 minutes, Behrouz. We've got 10 minutes for questions, so I'm going to open it up for questions now. So I've just got a few here. Someone has asked a question about the English language. It's interesting, you know, what's it been like for you learning to create and to express yourself in yet another language? You know, my father and my mother, English was their 6th language. Right? They had 5 other languages. In a way, there's a similar parallel. How has the English language been for you? And
yeah, I think English, now I'm trying to write in English. I mean, just move to English. But English for me, actually, you know, in colonialist knowledge, English recognized as a language of colonizers, you know. And but for me, English is a language of freedom. Is a language of freedom, because when I write in English, I don't need to write in Farsi, you know, and I get distance from Farsi. Of course, I write in Kurdish too. Now I write in, you know, this my new work is in Kurdish, so I'm writing in Kurdish. But sometimes, yeah, I know halfway to write in Farsi, but English for me is a language of freedom. You know, just to write in English. And in other side, English is a language that I like it because the first person that I met and we used to write to each other was Janet Galbraith, and she's a poet. And I learned how to write poetry in English. I know that my English is not perfect, but still with this lack of English, lack of vocabulary, I am able to write poetry. And I think, I mean, the first time that really I started to write in English, I learned beautiful words.
Yeah.
That is, I think, interesting. Yeah, because both of us, we were poets, and we used to write in a poetic language.
Yeah, it's very interesting because it's the same for me in a way, and also the same for, you know, Bono Wiener, who, after whom the lecture is named. He had the same feeling about English. For him, it was the language of freedom. I mean, he was a man that had a passion like you do for the Yiddish language, and he created school. He co-founded a school here for the language. He built institutions. He supported writers and poets, but he just loved especially the way the ordinary Australian people spoke the language, because for him it was freedom.